One of my favorite things about the bass community is this idea of cooperative competition. This rising tide lifts all boats, and we really had that culture here of we'd go all of us would carpool, take the same audition with the idea of like, well, I really want to win it, but if it doesn't work out for me, I want it to be you, that sort of thing. You think about how much time you spend with your teacher when you're in school compared to how much you spend with your peers, and if you're in the right sort of environment, it can be incredibly valuable just to brainstorm and find out what's working for somebody else, who has the same issues, how'd they solve them. As simple as like, what fingering did you use for this solo piece that I know you played last year? It's really, really, really great.
I had such a great time hanging out with Jack Unzicker in Texas a couple weeks back. And I'm so excited to bring you this conversation. We had a great time chatting, Jack and I. And I feel like I've known Jack for years, but I realized actually the first time we met in person was this past May of 2017 at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. George Amorim brought us both down for his Viva El Bajo festival, and I called Jack up on stage for that event, and we chatted. So, though this is the first official podcast interview, I kind of did interview Jack just a little bit there in Texas, South Texas. So, now here we are back in Texas, and we are hanging out at East Side, this great outdoor hang in Denton, Texas. So perfectly Denton, Texas kind of place. We're sitting outside at this picnic table, and there is a group next to us that gets increasingly rowdy as the night goes on. You can't really tell that much on this recording, but if you hear like mild craziness, that's what's happening. And I just got to say, before I dive in here, I love recording these live. There's such a great energy when you're talking to somebody live, and I love watching people sort of shy away from you when you pull out mics. What are they doing? Is this sort of effect that I see from them. So Jack Unzicker is the double bass professor at the University of Texas, Arlington, and plays in, you name it, every single group in the Dallas area. I went and saw him play with the Fort Worth Symphony. He was subbing in the Fort Worth Symphony, which he does frequently. He plays in the Dallas Chamber Orchestra, so many others. Check out the show notes for full length on that. And this was such a fun conversation because though we've only known each other a little while, we have a lot in common, and we chatted a lot before we hit record. So we dug into so many fascinating topics. Here's a partial list. We talk about what Jack's professional life looks like, where the bass is headed, what do possibilities look like for music students these days, the bass houses that Jack lived in with all these people that went on to do really cool stuff in their career, thoughts on private teaching, modalities of practice, talking about the Bradetich competition, keeping the focus on something musical and what a benefit that has for everything that you do, advice for 18-year-old Jack, and much more. And you're going to be hearing a bunch of tracks from Jack. And these are kind of interwoven into our conversation with the increasingly bawdy people in the background. And I will provide a complete list of these tracks. So just go to the show notes for this, contrabassconversations.com/Jack Unzicker, and you can see. But you're going to be hearing some Hinastera variation concertante. You're going to hear some Trower music. Tom Kniffik wrote a wonderful duo for Jack and his wife. You're going to hear some of that. A little Kol Nidre, Teppo Hauta'aho, some cadenza, and even more. Really hope you enjoy that. And I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Jack Unzicker.
Like probably as busy as a musician can be, with like full-time academic job, university job, and then the various groups you play with, and just the suite of activities. Can you just like run down what you do in a given year, maybe what full-time job and the other groups you play in?
Sure. So I'm just ending my tenure track process at the University of Texas at Arlington. So that's the end of 5 years. So I'm starting my 6th year on the tenure track, although this is my I think 11th year teaching there. I started in 2005, and then I was gone for a year, and then came back teaching classes rather than as the bass teacher after. That's a longer story. We can come back to that if you want. But so I have the full-time position at UTA, where right now I'm just teaching bass and chamber music, but I've taught a lot of classroom classes and stuff like that as well. I'm principal bass of 2 of the regional orchestras here, the Dallas Chamber Symphony and Plano Symphony, which is pretty decent budget for a regional orchestra, and a lot of good players in that group. And then I play a lot with Fort Worth Symphony, mostly the symphonic and large events. I get to play there. Anytime they have more than 4 basses, I'm most likely going to get asked to play with that group. Then I've been doing a lot of recitals and chamber music things on the tenure track, just saying yes to everything and really pushing for opportunities to get out and perform. The duo that I play in with my wife, violinist Martha Walvard, we've commissioned 5 pieces that we've been out playing and touring all over and recording, and so let's see. On top of that, run a small private studio. I've tried to have a larger private studio, but I found out that I have usually time for about 1, 2, or 3 students a week on top of everything that I do, because I usually do 1, 2, or 3. Well, let's say 1 or 2 orchestra programs a week on top of trying to learn other repertoire. Then I serve on the Bradetich Foundation board, and I'm currently the bass form editor for the ASTA, the American String Teacher, the String Journal, our national journal. I do some work as a photographer, as you know from this week, and I'm a dad. Yeah, I don't know.
You're
how many more things do we need?
Yeah.
Right?
So it's sweet, so in addition to the full-time job, you've got like another full career's worth of suite of professional activities in addition to, obviously.
Sure, yeah.
Actually, I'd love to, like, since you brought it up, so this duo project, what you've been doing with your wife, can you just talk through who you had commissioned pieces for you and what you played at ISB South Texas and other events?
Sure. We started playing together, we met playing together, of course, because we were both musicians, and especially when I started the tenure track process, and it was obvious that it's me doing a lot of traveling and trying to get a lot of playing in and a lot of solo recitals, and we were just starting a young family. We wanted to spend time together, and so we were looking for opportunities to perform together and travel together. And so we started in a typical way where we play a bunch of the existing repertoire. Like the first thing we did was the grand duo. We got to play that with the orchestra at UTA. And then looking through other existing works for bass and violin, or some transcriptions of the 2-part inventions of Bach and stuff like that. And then the first commission came about through the head of the composition area at UT Arlington. He wrote this set of 3 duos for us that are great enough that we wanted him to just call them duos for bass and violin rather than 3 duos, because we want him to write more. We still want him to write more.
Right.
And they're real crowd pleasers. I mean, really nice, effective pieces. And I think you heard that at the South Texas.
Right.
I think we started with those. Yeah. And that was the first piece that we had written. And it was really fun, exciting. And like I said, he writes really interesting and accessible, but crowd-pleasing music. But it's complicated, and it's got lots of variety and so forth. Then the next piece we commissioned was by Andrea Clearfield, and we had transcribed one of her pieces for bass and oboe, the 3 songs by Pablo Neruda. And she found out about it somehow. She probably has a Google search for her name, so that when press comes out with her name in it, she gets an alert. And so she contacted us and asked us about it, and just through getting to know her, we actually ended up basically in the same spot in Michigan at the same time. So I just went to meet with her for lunch and proposed the idea of having her write us some music and commissioning the new pieces. And so she wrote a 4-movement suite, Dream of Trees. It's also based on poetry, 4 different poets and 4 different pieces of poetry that are all really nice, atmospheric and moody, and again, really challenging pieces. We had another composer at UTA write us a 9-minute piece called Reach. And so he was really trying to extend the techniques of both instruments, and So we have, really high on the A string stuff like that, and lots of glissandi and just interesting stuff. It's great. It's a mixture of slower music and then rhythmic, kind of imitative middle section, and then back to some of the more lyrical playing. So it's a nice piece, challenging piece too. Let's see, the fourth piece was Tom Knifick. We were playing a chamber music festival up in Michigan, and Martha and I programmed the first duo that he wrote for Tom Martin, and he was near enough. So he came to introduce and talk to the audience, and we got to meet him there for the first time. And through meeting him and then seeing him at ISB, and then eventually we hosted him for the bass camps at North Texas, and went to his house next time I was in Michigan, and got to know him really well. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy, a really sweet man. And so he wrote duo number 3 for us. That's a 3-movement set, so we played those at the ISB recital, along with the 5th composition that we've premiered, which is by Michael Dougherty. And Michael Dougherty is 6-time Grammy Award-winning composer. Needs no introduction to most musicians, and especially in the band world. I mean, he is a living legend in the wind symphony world, and that's how I got to work with him for the first time, was actually playing in the Wind Symphony as a student at North Texas, where we recorded a couple of his pieces and premiered them, and he came down and worked with us there. My wife knew him at the University of Michigan, and Michael Dougherty has a really interesting process of writing music for instrumentalists, where he does what he calls workshopping, where he'll hire students from the university to come and try what he's thinking on the instrument and see what works idiomatically, and take their advice about what they're doing, or even if they're warming up and he's like, what's that? Show me that. And so he's really open to trying to make the instrument sound its best, and to really explore and exploit all the possibilities of the instrument. And then he mixes that with all of his other experience, with his jazz background and his interest in American folk music, pop music, you name it. I mean, he has so many influences that he draws from. So that piece is called The Diaries of Adam and Eve.
With narration.
With narration, right. So it's based on a novella of Mark Twain. So Mark Twain's satirical view, or his take on the biblical story. And it's hilarious. I mean, it goes over with, depending on the audience, right? We do it in universities, and the students are like, "Am I supposed to laugh at this?" But it's supposed to be a humorous take on it, and on male-femaleness. But it's great. It's a 30-plus minute, 7-movement epic duo. We're so fortunate to have, and it's explores all sorts of different things about Mark Twain's writing. And then, yes, Martha and I narrate the roles of Adam and Eve. When we premiered it, we were smart enough to have a couple of the voice faculty join us on stage, and they did a great job. And when we did the CD recording, they also did the narration there. But Martha and I have learned how to do it ourselves, so it's a little more mobile for traveling about. But it's a great journey. I mean, it's sarcastic, and my part, especially of Adam, he's just about the time that you start to think he is kind of a selfish jerk. Then he just turns on you at the end, and it's so wonderful, and it's so touching, and the music that Michael Dougherty sets it to, and how he uses familiar themes like from Carnival of the Animals and the Dies Irae, and some of the early hymns of early America, and he really speaks to a really wide audience because he uses so many of these recognizable styles, but in a really creative and clever way, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally. And congratulations for getting somebody like that to write, for bass and violin, for the bass. Like talk about. I'm reminded of the Harbison Concerto. A decade back almost at this point, and just getting composers like that to write for the bass is a big deal. So congratulations on moving the repertoire forward like that.
Thank you. And he's a big champion of the underdogs. I mean, his music well enough to know that all the bassoon solos, Dead Elvis, or even in the Red Cape Tango and the Metropolis Suite, like he features. He's not afraid to feature the underdogs. So. Yeah, we thank him. Thank you, Michael.
So we're here setting the scene. Jack and I are hanging out right before the finals of the Bradetich competition. So this will come out after that, because otherwise it would come out tomorrow. So we don't know who's going to be the first place winner or whatever. But we've sat and listened to almost 20 bass players from around the world. And Jack and I have sat there listening to all these people. Yesterday we listened to 9 players, 40 minutes each.
9 consecutive recitals.
Yeah, 40 minutes. It's a lot of bass playing.
It's a lot of bass playing. It was like an ISB, but you and I, we didn't even have to change seats.
Right. We sat there just like soaking it all in, all these different styles. What was going through your mind listening to all these players?
So many things. I mean, what would you like to talk about first? I mean,
here we're almost the exact same age. You know, we went to school in the 90s. Now here we are sitting in 2017, listening to these bass players. What's your perception of how things have changed in these last couple decades since we've been out, starting our journey to where we are now?
Right. Well, you and I, we're about the same age, but we have very different paths of how we got to where we are.
Sure.
But lots of similarities as well. Like we both studied with Jeff Bradetich at some point in time. And so my experience of coming to study with or meeting Jeff Bradetich, so I heard him play, and I had no idea that was even possible on the double bass. And then I came to North Texas, and suddenly everybody could play those sorts of things.
Where'd you run into Jeff? Did he come to Alaska, or where did that meeting happen?
I did a summer camp with him in Washington State.
Okay.
And so a week-long thing. It's called Hammond Ashley. It's very similar to the master classes that we do here at North Texas. And so I worked with him there for a week, and my teacher was a big fan, and she she encouraged me to seek it out. And so I came down here, and then everybody was playing repertoire I didn't know was even possible, and they were all 18, and I was 25, and...
Do you remember, I just got to ask, because I remember this very, very clearly. Do you remember the moment you heard Jeff, like the first moment of Jeff talking about the bass, or the first moments of those master classes? Do you remember what that was like? For me... I was walking into Northwestern, and I was late, like an idiot. I don't know why I was late, but I was late.
We all have
16-year-old
some story
Jason.
like that, right?
And I walk in, and I hear him talking about resonance, and I was before I even sat down, my brain was kind of going about and I think that day was. I think I was a different player that day, from before that and after that.
Yeah, I remember we set up in a big horseshoe with Jeff kind of at the center, semicircle around him, and I was all the way out on the first person on one side, and he always came and played my bass, my $2,500 plywood Juzak bass with a really short fingerboard, and it was perfect because if he was out there playing his Italian instrument, you get one idea of I could never achieve that. But when he plays your bass, or anybody, with a sound, plays your instrument, and then you have an idea of what it can sound like, it really motivates you, or inspires you to really get every penny that you can out of what you spend on your instruments, right? And so I don't have a real clear recollection about what was the first thing that he was talking about, but I do remember the demonstration, the first time that he put my bow on my string, and then a few days later after the recital and stuff like that, it was just I just didn't have any knowledge that was even possible on the instrument. And I think most bass players come through that realization. Well, I shouldn't say that. I should say most people have that realization. It's one of the novel things about the instrument is that we have the power to really shock people about all of the tonal possibilities of the instrument, the enormous range of the instrument, all of the different types of techniques that we can get, the natural harmonics, the artificial harmonics. The pizzicato on the bass is unlike any other instrument. And what we can do with vibrato and all the different ranges, and it can be astounding, especially when you hear the players that we've just heard, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. As we've witnessed this week. you're a professor at one of the UT schools.
Mm-hmm.
Have students coming through. Someone comes in and says, I want to major in music. I've heard Jeff Bradetich play. This is awesome. I think this is really cool. Like, I don't know what to major in. I don't know what, I've struggled with this so much myself, personally. Like I've had a whole journey of like music performance, music education, not wanting to do music at all. Like,
right.
Like what do you tell students? What do you tell those concerned parents about like what their kids should do? Like what's your outlook on possibilities in the music world right now? Apologies for the big question. I know that's like
that's a big question.
Tell me about life, Jack.
Yeah.
It's my problem. I'm sorry.
No. I'm thinking of many ways that we could go with this. There's a big push about trying to defend music.
Yeah.
Music in the schools, and to come up with all the science about how it benefits the brain and brain development, and how it makes you a team player to play in the orchestra and a problem solver and all of those benefits. But I'm becoming more of the mind that music is enough. Just music in itself. That it's a noble enough path and a worthwhile enough path that I don't feel like we have to defend it like we might feel like we have to administrators and to keep a public school program funded and those sorts of things.
Yeah, I don't think we have to defend it either, but like I think we do. Like I think we don't really have to defend it, but we feel the need to defend it somehow. Yeah.
Right, which might even weaken the argument a little bit. Right.
Yeah.
If you never ask somebody if they like music, right? You ask them, what kind of music do you like? It's just a given. It's just part of the humanity, right? So, I started so late at the double bass and being a music major because of how I grew up and where I grew up. To be a professional musician, that didn't exist. That wasn't an option. There were these amazing musicians in Juneau in Alaska. They all had day jobs. They worked for the state of Alaska. They worked at a CD store. They did all of these other things to hustle for a living because there was just no support for a musician where that could be all that they did. And it took me a while to realize that was even a possibility, much less that I could have a shot at that. And so, I had concerned parents when I was in school too, and they asked my teacher, so does he have a future, that sort of thing. And my teacher is very wise and said, well, he's a very good student.
That's a good answer.
And she passed on advice to me that she had heard from other people, which was basically that if you can think of anything else that you could do that would make you happy, you should probably do that, because you'll make a lot more money and have a lot more free time and that sort of thing. But if it's not an option for you, then I understand, and let's get to work, and you're talking to like-minded people at that point in time that also had to make that same decision. As far as getting into college and majoring in music or not majoring in music or minoring, or what type of music major do you want to be, in the UT system, we have a pretty good setup that in the first 2 years, you don't get to declare a major anyway. You're in an intended program about what your area of study is, but the core classes are basically the same. And at the end of your first 4 semesters, then you have a performance proficiency barrier where you play for everyone, and there are certain standards that you have to achieve if you want to be a performance major. But you and I were talking about this earlier too, about should I be a performance major or not for an undergrad?
Yeah, it's something worth giving some serious thought to. Yeah. What do you
think?
Yeah, what do you?
Well, you first.
Well. Okay. I will.
But we've talked about it already.
Yeah. So I have a bizarro path through the music world, as so many people do. But about 10 years ago, I was Mr. Darkness on just the prognosis of anybody being successful in any capacity in music in any way, whether it's performance or academia. Yeah. I'm actually much more positive now here in 2017 than I was in 2007. So I was writing all these things, and I was getting good press. I had some articles written about what I was talking about, and at the same time, I had all these high school students that were, they really wanted to be bass players. Mm-hmm. And I was at the same time, and they were reading my articles, and at the same time I was writing, it's like the death of music. the toilet flushes,
Yes,
like real, like just like stuff like that,
But I bet you were totally enthusiastic.
Optimistic people,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, and I remember some of the parents saying, "What do you think?" And I just couldn't say like, "No, this is it." And the fascinating thing is that so many of those students I was working with, an unbelievable percentage to me now, like 10 years later, have gone on and have been successful. They've got jobs in several of them, jobs in major orchestras. One's doing a 1 year in Baltimore, one's in Lyric, one's in an orchestra in Germany, one's just finished his master's at Yale. And
do you think it's because they had a very realistic outlook on it because of what they learned from you at such a young age?
well, that could be an element. I think that could be an element for sure. I think that what their success showed me was just how much more possible things are. Like I think I was just being too narrow-minded. So
yeah.
But even given that, it's hard. Let's just
Yes.
But then just because it's hard doesn't mean you shouldn't go for it. And I'm just a proponent of going for something like that with your eyes open.
Yeah.
But that's a complicated thing to tell a parent who's about to like shell out whatever dollars, for school, and a kid who's like looking down this path. So it's like it's a pain point. It's a complicated thing, but you've been incredibly successul in addition to the full-time job, which you have like integrating yourself into performance in a really wonderful way. What do you think it is about it? What do you think made you succeed where others might not have?
That's an excellent question. That is.
And again, sorry for the big question.
No. Yeah. Jason asks myself that all the time. Why me? Yeah. Well, you've known me not for very long, but you have a good idea about who I am, even though you haven't seen me work a whole lot with students, but or heard me play a lot, or you probably wasn't on your radar at all until the last few months or half a year or something like that.
Jack, you're a name in the bass. Like I am familiar, but the first time I actually had a chance to see you play and teach, it was like a couple months ago. But it's remarkably, inspired in both ways. So
well, thanks.
Yeah,
I think part of the reason was that I have been, I wouldn't say ambitious, but I would say I've always been really interested and excited about new opportunities, and trying to seek out new opportunities, but not with a set goal in mind. Like I never had in my mind that I was going to be a university professor or to play in a top 10 orchestra. I wasn't dyed in the wool with those thoughts in mind. It's been a really gradual process from, it's probably the longest circuitous route to get to where I am, because I didn't even have it as a dream that I could be a professional musician. And then when I started in school and started doing it for studies, I thought, well, I'm going to play music my entire life, and maybe the better I am at it, the larger a part of my life it'll become.
Do you remember when that moment was when
Absolutely.
you thought about like you're like, boom, I'm going to do that? What was that?
It was the same sort of situation. Into my sophomore year, what am I going to study? And I was on the fence between earth science,
wow.
and geology and glaciology.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense given where you're from.
Yeah. It's totally. It was. I really enjoyed looking at the mountains and trying to imagine how they got to look like they did, and I grew up just 4 miles from the face of a glacier, and then I started doing my first field research and getting out there in the road cuts and looking at the minerals and measuring the degrees and the angles and then I thought, man, I cannot get excited about this part of it. I like the big picture, holistic sort of armchair geologist sort of thing.
Sure.
But yeah, so then I decided to study music, and I got really lucky that Chuck Israels was the jazz bass teacher at the school that was in the same town that I was in, and I auditioned on electric bass and never touched a double bass. And And I have no idea why they accepted me as a major, especially having been on the other side of that table now for auditions. And then I just ran with it. I mean, my first lesson was with the first year was with a Bulgarian exchange student who was telling me I needed to keep my knee higher when I played, and he was talking about my elbow. I mean, it was not a good scene. And then after that, I got a really great teacher named Anna Doak, who was driving up from Seattle, and she taught me how to draw sound with the bow. Fell in love with that sound, got into classical music through that, worked hard, made the finals of the concerto competition after playing bass for like a year and a half. Principal in the orchestra. Like, I just ran with it as hard as I could, and then came to North Texas and found out, I'm still really far behind. I became a big fish in a small pond really quickly, and then came here and it got real.
And was that, so you were there a couple years in Washington and then came here and finished off at North Texas, right?
Right, yeah, many years in Washington.
Yeah. How long were you in Washington?
I moved there when I was very young. Like, I had just turned 18.
Okay.
And so I went to school and got 2 degrees and, associates in geology, and then a jazz studies degree. And then I took a year off between high school and college because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was really young.
What were you doing that year?
Working 3 jobs usually, and trying just to afford a pizza at the end of the night. And figured out I need some skills, and got done with a bachelor's degree, and then moved to Seattle and did the same sort of thing. Was working and doing a little bit of playing. Not practicing as much as I wanted to be doing, figuring out very quickly I wasn't ready for the professional life. Had just done the camp with Jeff, and then went and played for him again, and as an audition to come to North Texas, and stayed for a master's and a doctorate. Thought I'd be there for 3 years and back to the Pacific Northwest, and I've been in Texas almost 20 years now, I guess. So.
We're going to take a break for our conversation to thank the folks that help us keep the lights on here at this DIY indie operation that is Contrabass Conversations. And I would like to thank Upton Bass, who has been sponsoring the podcast, the blog, on and off again and on again right now. So thank you very much. For the past decade plus, I go back and I look in my Evernote file, and I have Upton adverts from 2007 for doublebassblog.org. So it's so cool to have them on board, and it's so cool to see the journey that Upton's been on. I love following along with people's stories, as you can tell if you listen to this podcast. And Upton's got a great story. They have continued to grow and evolve, and it has been so cool to see them move into all these creative new directions, like, for example, their Gary Carr model bass, the Upton Carr model bass, played obviously by Gary Carr, but also Craig Butterfield, who Jack and I both know and talk about in this episode, and David Murray, the wonderful David Murray, ISB board member. So wonderful what the Upton folks are doing. Check out their instruments. Thank you for everything you do for the bass community and for Contrabass Conversations. And check them out, uptonbass.com. And also thank you to the Bass Violin Shop. They do sales and appraisals of new and used double basses, and they are located in North Carolina. They've got the Southeast's largest inventory of basses. That's laminate, hybrid, and carved double basses. So if you're looking for an entry-level bass or a top pedigree instrument, check out bassviolinshop.com, and they'll be able to hook you up. Thank you so much to Bass Violin Shop and Upton Bass for sponsoring the show.
You were living in these bass houses. These these rock stars. Who are you living with in those bass houses?
Okay, so the first bass house was with Brandon McLean, who's now an associate principal in Pittsburgh Symphony, and Joe Kaufman, who's associate principal in Seattle Symphony, and Tony Perry, who's one of the world's greatest bass players, who's not playing anymore. But if he picked it up today, I bet he could just play one of the best Bottesinis that you'd ever heard in your life. And and then Brandon and I, in total, we lived in 4 different houses together. So twice just the 2 of us, and then twice with 4 bass players. And so the bass house number 2, again with Brandon, was with Craig Butterfield, who's a professor at University of South Carolina, and just an amazing player. You name it, he can do it. He played in the Maynard Ferguson Big Band. He's an incredible composer. He wrote this incredible quartet when he was still here that played in a quartet with Brandon and Jeffrey Eccles and Craig Butterfield. We played at the Richmond ISB, did a recital. Amazing quartet, very Edgar Meyer influenced, mixed with South Indian classical, which Craig is also really good at. And then he's doing all this crossover kind of newgrass with Jesse Jones, who's a mandolinist and composer at Oberlin. And Bill Shetler was the 4th member of that house, who's an outstanding bassist that is associate principal of the Louisiana Philharmonic. And also a great luthier. So we had our own luthier shop in the house as well during that time. So all great experiences to be surrounded with all these guys on their way up. And one of my favorite things about the bass community is this idea of cooperative competition. This a rising tide lifts all boats, and we really had that culture here of we'd go all of us would carpool, take the same audition with the idea of like, well, I really want to win it, but if it doesn't work out for me, I want it to be you, that sort of thing. You think about how much time you spend with your teacher when you're in school compared to how much you spend with your peers, and if you're in the right sort of environment, it can be incredibly valuable just to brainstorm and find out what's working for somebody else, who has the same issues, how'd they solve them. As simple as like, what fingering did you use for this solo piece that I know you played last year? It's really, really, really great.
What reminds me of that, there's Zig Ziglar, the great motivational speaker. He's like got the line, "You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." So like being in a bass studio like that, living with people like that, being around people like that, it just informs everything you do.
Yeah,
and I think that's such an important thing for whatever you're studying. Like in addition, just like that weekly time you spend with that mentor, that teacher, that coach, that guide. Having those people around you that are gunning for the same exact thing. And it's obviously paid off well for all of you, because all those people have gone on to really lead in the music world. Yeah, and there are many others too that came through North Texas while I was here and have gone on to do great things. And it was an inspiring time for certain. But that sense of a community, that's something that I really, really want to instill in my studio, and that we try to do in every large situation. We get bassists together. ISB, you can feel the love from miles away there, and just that idea of, it's interesting about how it is with double basses. Like it's so common that they're friendly, they're outgoing, they're compassionate. I'm not really sure what it is that brings this personality group to the instrument, or that the instrument itself creates those personalities. Yeah, there's something very, very powerful about the community aspect of the whole thing. And I think I just got it. The 5 people you spend the most time with, if 3 of them are the double bass, you're humble, you're patient, you're understanding, Yeah, absolutely. I'm a private teacher. I've got 18, 20 students or something. I want to build a bass community. I want to inspire my students, get them motivated to do things. I go, what do I do? Again, apologies for that. Hold on. Let me solve the piece in the Middle East, and I'll be right back, okay? Just a second. How do you motivate students? How do you motivate students? Okay, well, I would say this would be an easier question if we can create, imaginary student A that has these particular traits, interests, or lack thereof, and personality, and those sorts of things. Because I think it's going to be different with every single type of student. Can you think of a particular student that you had an issue with? Yeah, sure. Here's oh boy. Which way to go? Don't name them, please. So I'm taking lessons because mom and dad want me to. And here I am, and I'm not a bad kid. I'm not openly rebellious.
Yeah.
And I maybe do a minimal amount of work on the music that you talk about with me.
Sure.
But here's my level. Okay, so that I know from past experience that a kid like that can go to being like on fire about the bass.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what are some strategies, things you could introduce to them to like light that fire?
Yeah. We could role play a little bit, and I could ask you questions such as like, what are your favorite things about music? Like, why do you like playing the bass? Like, tell me about your favorite things about playing the bass. And if it's, I like, I'm playing in the orchestra with my friends, then you realize it's a social thing. And so we try to create opportunities to make it social. So in the lessons, make sure you're playing duets. Save a little bit of time to collaborate a little bit and do something so it's together. I would have us role play, but if you're really going to act like the high school student that I know you are, I'm going to be like, tell me, what is it about the bass that you really like? No, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm really tired. I have a lot of calculus homework.
I want to, it's going to look good on my college application. Yeah, okay. So, motivation, we talked about this in a couple of different times that you and I have been just talking about these things. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on in that recent ASTA article was about motivating people to practice. Mm-hmm. And then you and I also talked about motivation as far as getting students to accidentally have some success.
Yeah, right. Which is totally fascinating to me. Like that. Yeah, that
positive
spark.
Reinforcement.
Yeah,
that seems to come out of nowhere.
Yeah,
where I remember one simple comment in my undergrad in this like conducting 101 class, and I did one musical thing, and the teacher said, "Oh, look at this. He's going to be a great conductor," and it's stuck in the back of my head. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'll be a conductor sometime. I
still remember moments like that.
Sure.
Like one person said, I played something in a master class over 20 years ago.
Yes.
And they said, he's genius. And I still to this day, 27, I'm like, I'm a genius.
I'm a genius.
That's power there. Those sort of things.
Yeah. And gosh, what great reinforcement for choose your words carefully with students, right?
Yeah.
That you can set them up for a positive future with the simplest remark in front of other people or just one-on-one and just some encouragement and so that recognition of work done equals you brought joy to us. We're so grateful for what you've done. Thank you so much. And then trying to figure out ways to perpetuate that and set your students up for some successful things. So I usually try to get them to think about a place where they could play. And so it's usually, in Texas here, asking them at your church, is there a way that you can play some music or something? And I always get them to play something that's way within their grasp. Get them out there playing something that they worked on that they could play well 2 years ago. And so they go out, they don't have to worry about that. Then if they're just going to be concerned with like being in a different environment, that they're going to be solid so that they feel super comfortable. And then, quickly get them back up to their own repertoire. But trying to create those ways of getting them some positive feedback. And then I don't know about you, but what drives you to practice the most now? Is it fear of public embarrassment? I put a recital date on the calendar, therefore I will practice.
Yeah, that's a big motivator.
Yeah. So there's that as well. But I think you do that too soon or you have a bad experience, then nobody wants to go through that. I mean, anybody who's been out on stage unprepared never wants to relive that sort of experience again. So.
Speaking of the whole practicing thing. And so Jack, editor for ASTA, the bass column, the journal, right? And you've written several things, but like the article that I have read a couple times now at this point is all about like practice techniques and modalities and that sort of thing.
Yeah. What was the purpose of all that?
Or, just like what? Talk about what was in that article.
Sure. So I wanted to talk about how practice works, how it works within the body and the brain, so we can understand like what parts of practice are essential and why do we have to spend so much time? Why hasn't somebody figured out a way to just completely hack the system so that we can do these three things and take this magic pill and get to where we want to be? And so I just explained a little bit about myelination and how repetition is just a necessary process of building brain structures.
Yeah, so what's myelination? Like I think that process is fascinating.
Yeah,
when
it
you
is.
describe it to people, they're like, what? Something physiological is happening when I'm practicing?
Right, and it's nothing that anyone that's been in the music field for the last 3, 4, 5 centuries wouldn't say, oh yeah, why do we need evidence of this? We all know that this is how the process works and that we see it in everyone that's successful, that repetition is a part of what we do. But myelination, the myelin sheath is an insulator for the axons and a part of the brain that basically sends the signals from the brain to the muscles. And the insulator greatly increases the speed of that transfer. So the things that we do repeatedly build up these myelin sheaths, including things that we do incorrectly.
Right.
And hence the whole, practice makes permanent, not practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
But so when we have scales and things like this, things that we do all the time or that we've done, you can think of things in your normal day-to-day life as well about repetition. It just frees up the brain to think about other things. Like you really don't have to use a whole lot of brain power to brush your teeth anymore, or to turn on a light switch. You don't even have to look at the wall, and you can grab the light switch out of midair, right? Just through repetition. So it's one of those things that we just can't completely skip, but there are ways to make our time in the practice room more efficient and to be successful quickly and to move through some of the pitfalls of practice. So those were the main things that I wanted to talk about. There was about how to practice smarter so that you avoid feelings of being overwhelmed and frustrated, which I think were the biggest things that I had to overcome as a young student and in my whole process of learning how to practice.
Well, so I've got this student working on botticelliology right now, and they're going into the practice room. What do they do to, because myelination occurs, right? So like what do they do to not practice the wrong things?
Yeah. So let's say it's what we'd all like to do, which is to just get in there and sing, just play, just love it, and get to the same spot and have it completely fall apart or stop every time, and then play it again, and you sound great, and then you don't sound so great, and you get really good at stopping or not being able to play the same thing, right? If we don't at some time assess what's going on and be a little analytical about the components that come together to make what we want to hear. So you start out, you play through it, and then you make an assessment of what are the things that aren't sounding quite right. And it's easy to say that like this, but the truth is that it could always be better.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Everything needs work. No matter how good it sounds, you can still have better vibrato or shape that a little bit better or something like that. But say we were getting down to just a few things. So you decide on what you're going to work on, like what needs work, and then figure out what are the technical things that are there. Are you playing notes in a position that need the intonation cleaned up? Is there a shift? Is it a bow issue? Is it an expressive issue? Is it that you're not able to get the vibrato to work in the way that you want to say what you want with these sorts of things? And then systematically go about trying to figure out a way that you can focus on one thing and make it better, and then expand it to include some other things so that you're able to keep track of. You basically don't want to play any further than you can think in advance. And then as you slowly build that out over time, then you can play through the whole piece and never get ahead of your brain, whether it be the notes, the fingerings, the expressive things that you want to be playing. And so it's a process of building and trying to making progress on whatever you're working on. And if you're not, it means you're probably doing too much and that you need to make it a little bit smaller so that you can improve very quickly. I can tell you that becoming really busy, having a crazy schedule and having children and getting into that next stage in your life, you become very efficient with practice. If you have just a couple minutes. Actually, you remember Nicholas Walker's egg timer?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Sure, and that was great advice, just fantastic advice. He would say, people think it's ridiculous for me to play for 2 minutes and then go on to something else, or that's all I have time to practice today. But if you take that little component and want to get better at it, 2 minutes is about perfect. You can actually make some great progress on bum, ba-da-dum, 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 and getting good articulation.
Right.
And then you come back to it the next day and it sounds better, So
yeah, it's so like starting at the beginning and going until I crash and burn.
Right.
And then starting at the beginning and going until I crash and burn. That's not the best policy.
That's why I quit playing piano. That was the end of my piano lessons. In all honesty, my piano teacher, we didn't talk about how to practice. It was you need to practice more. And it was so frustrating. I mean, I would try and I would get to the same spot and hit that wall and bang my head against it until I'd be in tears at the piano. And that's no fun. Nobody wants to do that. And then I can see it happening with my students where they have the same reaction from just being overwhelmed and thinking that if I just focus on one thing, it's not gonna be good enough. I've got to fix everything today, and then they end up not going back the next day because it's too painful an experience. So take it in small bites. How do you eat an elephant, Jason?
Right.
One bite at a time.
It's a hard thing to wrap your brain around. It's a hard thing to it takes patience and takes some discipline, and that's something that takes some time to develop for students, at least for the ones I've worked with.
Yeah, I wonder if you can think back to a moment that things started to click. And it was probably something where you didn't notice when it happened, but all of a sudden you noticed you were in a groove with practice where you spend a lot of time. I think the undergrad is a great, if you haven't done it already, your main job is to fall in love with practicing, to figure out how to make that an enjoyable experience, how to make the process and the work enjoyable.
I remember the exact moment that happened for me. It was I was playing in a Rush cover band.
Yes.
In South Dakota, and this was pre-college. This was 18-year-old, 17-year-old Jason, and the guitarist. I remember him just saying, he's like, I can play anything if I work on it correctly. And it was just like the most cavalier kind of thing. But he was right. He's like, oh yeah, I just do this, and I spend time, and I do this, and I look at it this way. And before that, I think I thought of music more as just something that was baked into a person's innate abilities. And I really started thinking about that, and because the guy, he was not the most talented player. So it was not like a Jimi Hendrix of the guitar.
Yeah.
But he could do a lot. And he was like, oh, yeah, I just do this and I work on it. I do this X, Y, and Z way.
It is really accumulation of hours.
Yeah, and it was just it's total confidence. There's nothing I can't do. It's just and that was sort of liberating to hear that for me.
Well, the competition, the players that we just heard, that was one of the thoughts that I had, circling back to that, what did you think?
Yeah.
Was just an enormous respect and gratitude for the amount of time that went into the preparation, because the amount of repertoire that they bring to this competition and to have it at this level of consistency and just thought, there's so much artistry going on, as well as just the technique. Even since the last competition that was, only 5 years ago, the level of playing and consistency, especially with intonation and sound, it's already gone up another level. And so, if I can take a moment to say thank you to all of the competitors, it's just so much work and so much thought and so much support from the people around them, and great teaching and all sorts of things that combine for that one moment on the stage. And and
it's remarkable to hear all those people that came out and played. There was almost 20, for the first round, and a lot of them didn't move on. And I'm sure that frustration, discouragement, they're feeling that, and And I felt that in my life. I can't tell you how many times. And like I've got kind of, I've felt that a lot. And I kind of know that feeling and how I work through it. Like, how do you've had incredible success, but I'm sure you've had setbacks professionally, things you wanted to do that you didn't get. Like,
sure.
How do you handle that? How do you keep from going into deep depression? It's just like discouragement.
Well, you assume.
You assume.
Yeah. No, I handle things okay. I have an ace up the sleeve, so to speak, which is that I've already made it so much further than my ambition when I set out to do this that I got nothing to lose at this point in time, So to the competitors that didn't advance, they have to think, because those that made it to the finals, some of them played better on the first round than on the second round.
Sure.
And some of vice versa. Some players that played better on the first, if they had played on the first round, played on the second round like they did on the first round, they might have advanced. And so you think about how just any given day that things can change for everyone, and it's just so many moving variables, and it doesn't say anything about anybody's abilities. It's just, this is a temporal art. What happens on the day that it happens, and you can't control that. That's not something within your control about. I mean, you can prepare to the best of your ability, but there's still other variables. We're not machines, we're not robots, thank God. We're artists, and so just to keep that in mind, that if all the same competitors did it next week, the outcome, I'm sure, would be different from first round to second and second to final.
It's such an important thing to think about, because people think it's like there are these things that are built up. It's like these legacy moments of people doing X, Y, Z.
Right.
But it's an art full of snapshots of people in a particular time, a particular space, feeling a particular way, like executing a particular way, and like result. He's like, oh, so and so did such and such. Well, it's much more fluid than you might think based on like what you read. Results of something being an audition or a competition. Or
it's much better. It's much better when we have these sorts of competitions that involve a stopwatch. Sure makes it easier, right? Competition is for horses. Was that Bartok? I think.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So, for me, like anything I do that I can't tell you how many times I've like not gotten what I was hoping for and felt crappy. And at this point, like early 40s, I'm like, I'm just going to feel bad for a day. I'm going to feel bad for a day.
Yeah.
And then I'll be better. And then like 2 days, it'll be like totally in the past.
Right.
And it's like sort of like embrace the crappy feeling.
Right.
I just know I've done it enough. It's like, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Have you become a better musician through the process of preparing for every audition and competition that you've ever done in your entire life?
Oh, sure. And that's something Ira Gold is talking about with me. It's a continuum, and many people, not just Ira, Joe Conyers, I could probably name dozens of people, but it's a continuum. And you might feel like this is the success or failure of your career, but in reality, we're all on this journey.
Yeah.
And the further you go along this journey, I feel like I'm understanding my humanity and the humanity of those around me, the more I succeed or fail or go on this journey. And I feel like I'm becoming a better musician and communicator and person as a result. So success or failure, whatever, I just think of that. That's just like an event, and I try my best not to tie a lot of emotion to that event, but it's just an event on the journey.
Yeah, that's one of the things with my students that I say often is that it's the process. If you can enjoy the process, and you're going to go out there and you're going to try, but don't get caught up in the results of what happens on that day, but think about where you were when you started this 3 months ago and where you're going to be at the end. And that is something that doesn't go away. What happens at the end of that is not as important. If you keep going on this path and this ascending journey of building your abilities as a musician, all of your artistic skills and your technique on this particular instrument, that's what it's all about. And then if you keep focused on that, then the jobs, the awards, those sorts of things will just happen, because and that's a hard thing to think of yourself when you're in the moment about that. But every time I've prepared, I can tell you, like the first professional audition that I prepared for, that I really felt on the other side of it, even though I didn't advance out of the first round, I felt on the other side of it that I'd made such huge leaps into building consistency and basically that was the first step into really getting up to a professional level of playing. And I don't know if I would have done that if I hadn't taken that audition. It might have taken a lot longer. So maybe that's it. We talk about how repetition and hours can develop consistency in those competitions, those auditions, and the things that or a recital, or at each time you do one of those, it instigates in an increasing the amount of time and thought that you're going to put into something, and then that just gets you up another level, kind of plateau busting for your technique for the rest of your life, your technique and your artistry.
You're a great player. I've heard you play a few times, and it's like wonderful playing. Like,
Thank you.
What goes through your mind when you're in a live performance? Are you thinking about technique? Are you thinking about, I hope I don't screw up? Are you thinking, what are you thinking about what are you focusing on?
Well, I can tell you that I tried for a long time that my focus was perfection, and that never worked.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
You're always going to be dissatisfied if that's your...
This is actually a leading question about something I wanted to talk to you about in the future, about mindfulness.
Yeah.
And another bass player buddy of mine who's a therapist, and he gave a presentation at the ISB in Fort Collins, and his name's Robin Ruscio, and this beautiful presentation. I mean, I almost had tears. I mean, I had water welling up in my eyes about how in touch he was with what goes on with musicians, and how he spoke to us about these sorts of inner battles and things that we have to do all the time. And so I had been trying this with myself and with my students to find almost a meditative center for performance that was not perfection. And so sometimes it will be vibrato, and sometimes I'll just keep thinking phrase. And so whenever I would start feeling my mind drift off into kind of the running commentary, of somebody basically writing a review of the concert while it's going on in my head while I'm trying to play something incredibly difficult, doesn't work out very well for the fingers. But if I had a mistake, or if my mind started to wander, I would just knee-jerk reaction, think the word phrase or vibrato or color or something like this that would draw me back into a continuously positive, reinforcing idea, something that you could continue through the entire performance, rather than you're thinking about perfection and you have a little slip in the first line of the first piece, and then what do you do for the next 45 minutes? Yeah, sorry, folks. We'll just get through this really as quick as we can, I guess, and then you can all go home. Sorry about that.
Well, I love that concept of keeping that focused on something musical, like phrase.
Yeah.
Like I had an experience last year at the Golden Gate Bass Camp. Mm-hmm. I was playing second for the faculty recital. Diana Gannett was first, and got up and played, like a Bach, like violin partita.
Sure.
Right? And who's in the audience? Rufus Reed's in the audience. All these, like, all my lectures. And you know what? That was one of the least nervous times I've ever been in my entire life. Mm-hmm. And it's because I was thinking, I'm giving the people this gift, and that's the gift of this piece that I'm going to be playing. And I'm just this vessel that the piece is coming through.
Yeah.
And it's not about me.
Yeah.
It's this music, and I'm just helping to transmit this music. And there's something very calming about that.
Yeah.
It was a time where, like, 10 years ago, I think I would have been, crapping my pants in terms of nervousness. But I was like, I think that keeping it focused on something outside of yourself and phrase or love and just like communication. That
the gift is a great metaphor. Mm-hmm. The idea of, I love this idea because it's something that's handmade, so you might see some of the tool marks on it. But if you treat it like that, with that idea in mind, that here is this gift that I made for you, I'm so glad you're here. Because I've been working on this. I've been working on this for 30 years. I've taken all these lessons. I've put countless hours in honing my skill by doing other gifts. But this one I made for you, for today, for right now. And I'm so glad that you're here, and to have that kind of presentation in mind. And it, giving gifts is humbling, and it's a gratitude as well as from the giver and the receiver. And there's that sentiment that I think can help with this positivity and humanness of that. Yes, it's a homemade gift. It was not made by a machine, and it's not everybody come to the recital. I'm going to play Bottesini. Well, Finale's going to play it for you, and let's see how long everybody can sit through Finale playing Bottesini. It's going to be great. Come on, everyone. So talking with students and as they're preparing for their first recital and having that sort of thing and saying, you've done so much preparation for this, and you're there playing for people that want you to succeed. Everyone that's there wants to hear you succeed and is in your corner, and they love you, and then that's not going to change no matter what happens on stage. You could trip over your dress, fall on your bass, bust it into 1,000 splinters. Everybody's still going to love you just the same, if not maybe even a little more, because what you just did was another expression of humanity, which is what this is all about,
Right.
Yeah. To go back to what are you thinking of, I'm not going to say that I don't have a plan, and there's not a phrase of music that I can put on autopilot ever. And by the time that I've worked up and put the care into a program, I have things that I want to bring out in every phrase, and I have technical issues that I have to see coming from 3 or 4 bars away. This is the second ending. Don't get caught in the roundabout and go back again. Playing Bach in a circle, but that's just all part of the practice process, where you have to start thinking about your mental mapping. So as you play through a piece, that you have all of these reminders as you go through and they're expressive, they're technical, they're all sorts of things. I've never really gotten to the point where I started putting in the choreography and the like stage expression thing.
Sure.
But I went to Brett Shirtliff's presentation at ISB, and it was very compelling, and it's something that I should probably think of. Because if you've ever seen him play, it really is engaging, and
sure.
and it's not overdone, and it's tasteful, and it really brings another element to the performance, and it doesn't interfere with his technical security at all, does it? I mean, he's just a beautiful and astounding player. So
yeah, and everybody's got a different element of that. And like Seiji Ozawa had a lot of physical choreography into what he did. He thought about it a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of other conductors.
Absolutely.
On the spot. So everybody's on a different point of that spectrum.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, because gesture equals sound.
Yeah.
When you're a conductor, and so every shape you show is going to have a different effect on the orchestra and on different orchestras. And so I could see that. And I mean, conducting 101, yes, you've got to be able to get through your starts and stops and fermatas and all of that and have a plan. But as far as like showing the same phrasing and stuff like that, I would say I bet he's got a great choreography in mind, but he was such an artist that I bet he was able to be real loose and be in the moment as well to really shape what he was hearing.
All right, Jack.
Yeah.
18-year-old Jack. Give him some advice.
Let's see.
From your perch of what you're doing now, all the groups you're playing in, your professorship.
I think he would be shocked, absolutely shocked, to see where 41-year-old Jack is living now, and what the life is like. I mean, I was struggling so much at that point in time, Jason. I was working telemarketing, and I was working early in the morning. It was a call center where people called you. I didn't have to call people, but they called me, and I'd started at like 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, because we took calls from the East Coast, and we were in Seattle. And so I would work that, and then in the evenings I would go door to door and as a salesman. And that was talk about how to build charisma and courage, and how to build some rhino skin, not thick skin, rhino skin. And the funny thing was, I was really good at it, because I was the least pushy person. I was the nicest person you could ever imagine, and hardly ever did anybody ever have anything mean to say to me. And I was just, I'd done sales all through high school and, worked in a guitar shop all through high school and just had the attitude of, if this isn't good for you, it's not good for me, so I'm not going to push you into something you don't want, but if it's going to work out for you, well, great. If everybody's happy, cool. Otherwise, ciao. So I was working late, getting up super early and had no idea that, well, I still get up early, stay up late, but it's doing something that I've always been interested in and passionate about. And I would say advice as far as what to do differently. I've given a lot of thought about things that I could have done differently, such as when I was in school, take on more debt to stay on campus and practice more and shorten the amount of time I was in school. But part of that need of having to support myself to get through school gave me all of this teaching and performing experience that led to me, I don't tell anybody. Nobody's going to listen to this, right? But I had my first college teaching job, and I'd been playing the bass for 9 years and started at 21. So I started at 30 teaching university, and if I hadn't been such I have to do all of these things just to make a living, if I was just sitting in the practice room, then that wouldn't have led to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, and eventually to the full-time tenure track position. So if I had just stayed in school and practiced and become a great player and not gotten all the experience that I had, maybe things wouldn't have worked out the same way. I wouldn't have met my wife. I think everything has worked out to put me right here. at this table, exactly. Surrounded by all these people.
Texas. Early September. Yeah,
I would have taken more pictures of the Pacific Northwest
there
while
we go.
I lived
okay,
there.
That's good. I fully understand.
Jack, so great to hang out with you. And folks, jackunzicker.com will take you to everything he's up to. And I don't even know if we talked about this, but he is a fabulous photographer. He probably doesn't need any more gigs, but if you're looking for a photographer, he does great work. All of the Bradetich Foundation, the Bradetich competition footage was shot by Jack, photographed, and the videos were shot by Jack too. And I've gotten so many comments about, wow, Jason, what fabulous video work you did for the Bradetich competition. Not the Facebook stuff, that was all done on my iPhone, but the interviews and the final concert recording. And I say, well, when you have great footage from someone like Jack, it's easy. Then I just slap things together in the video editor. He does great work as well, obviously, on the bass and in the world of teaching. And what was so much fun is we finished this part of the conversation with this, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, which is a question I like to ask. And Jack then flipped that question and asked me the same thing, which set the whole conversation into a really interesting new dimension. And we started talking about entrepreneurship. We started talking about frustration, discouragement, and fighting through things. And we talked about tech and iPads and all that kind of stuff. And I took all of that, and we're going to put out another episode, which I rarely do these days. I used to always break these up into multiple parts, and I thought it was really confusing. But every once in a while I do that. And I thought this will work really well because we dig into all kinds of fascinating stuff with this footage that I haven't put on this episode. I'm going to, in the next couple of weeks, put out a second episode, and it's much more of a back and forth, although this was very back and forth, more so than what I frequently do. But just a real kind of different direction. Like our conversation took a left turn. So I'm going to put that out as its own thing. And I know you'll dig that. And I'm sure you enjoyed following along with what Jack's been up to and his path from Alaska to what he's doing now. And if you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. And I know all the hundreds of people I've had on the show appreciate it. And the place to go is contrabassconversations.com. That will take you to everything. Links topics, resources, materials, that kind of stuff, you can get to my blog with almost 4,000 posts, I think, at this point. So check that out if you haven't before. And I'd love to hear from you. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com will get you in touch with me. And let me know, what did you like about this show or any other show? What would you like to hear more of? Who would you like to hear from? And what about? That would be great. And I'm just so glad to have you here. And we will see you again soon for more coverage of this great week I had in Texas and more content about life on the low end of the spectrum.